Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Baker Institute Energy Forum. We're delighted that you're all here for our special Shell Distinguished lecture tonight. How many light bulbs does it take to plug in an electric car? It's a very exciting event for me. I have a good friend who was a gymnast for many years, and when she finally wound down her career, she had this insight that she shared with me. She said that if she could do a do-over, she would come back as an ice skater. And so what I would say to you this evening about my career is, many of you who know me know I started out my career. I'm now the director of the Baker Institute Energy Program, but I began my career as a print journalist, writing about oil and energy. But now when I see these sort of amazing technologies that are available in multimedia, I think if I could do a do-over and think about and write about public policy in the United States, I would like to come back as a documentary filmmaker. And so that makes it especially exciting for me to have as our guest one of the premier documentary filmmakers in the United States and perhaps even abroad. Who Killed the Electric Car remains the #2 top-selling documentary DVD on Google. I think it stands as one of the most entertaining and sought-after documentaries in the last few years. I know I attended the movie with several members of the Rice faculty, and we still talk about and laugh about some of the scenes. So, and people agree with us because our speaker tonight, Chris Paine, has also been on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. He has a new movie coming out called Revenge of the Electric Car, and he's going to share with us maybe some exclusive trailer clip of that. Chris' movie, Who Killed the Electric Car, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2006. The documentary, which detailed the demise of General Motors' EV1 electric vehicles and the behind-the-scenes politics that went with that, went on to win numerous awards. Paine has been an executive producer of Faster, a movie about the world's fastest motorcycle race, No Maps for These Territories, which was about science fiction writer William Gibson, and there are more details about his career in tonight's program. So without further ado, I invite Chris to come out and speak with you. At the end of Chris's lecture, he'll take some questions, and then for those of you who are interested in getting a copy of the movie, Chris, we have a marker, a Sharpie marker for him to sign your DVD if you'd like to buy a DVD for $20. We'll have a sort of a DVD signing instead of a book signing at the end of the event. So it's with my great pleasure I welcome Chris Paine.
Thank you, everyone. I thought we might start with just a short trailer from the film, which is now almost 4 years old. How many people have had a chance to see the last film we worked on? So I'll show this in case you haven't seen it. It's sort of a hypey Sony Pictures classic. You know, they're trying to sell the film, but it does give kind of an overview of some of the images we worked with and where we were headed when we made the film, and perhaps even creates a little context for the next film that we're working on now. You can see that the stakes are a little bit hyped up for the purpose of a trailer, but you know, the reason we made this film is we want to talk about why California's electric car program in the mid-1990s, actually at the end of the 1990s, didn't make it into the 21st century. By the time 2000 came along, the cars had been destroyed, and almost no one had had the experience of driving an electric car or really thinking about, is this something I would try for myself? So we'll get back into that more today. The name of my PowerPoint is, how many light bulbs does it take to plug in an electric car? And let's see, we present our tools. If anybody knows the answer, we could just wrap up the presentation right now, and we can go right to dinner. Obviously, it's kind of a rhetorical question, because in this sense, light bulbs is the idea of an idea and people, and there are, one idea could create a whole revolution, or many, many ideas and many, many people can work together to create a fundamental transformation. There's a light bulb joke that goes something like, how many economists does it take to screw in a light bulb? And the answer is none. If the light bulb needed changing, market forces would have screwed the light bulb in itself. And many people ask, well, sure, why, if electric cars are so great, how come the market just hasn't brought them to market, and how come they haven't succeeded? And it's a very complex question, a very complex answer. So before we get into why I think there's some really incredibly driving forces for the electric car to enter the marketplace in the next few years, and I'm sure you've been following this in the media. I'll just give a quick background on how I went from driving my Ford Explorer to thinking seriously about electric cars, and then spending 5 years making a series of films about them. My first electric car was this one here. If you can see it on the screen, that's a Mattel electric car manufactured in Hawthorne, California, near where I live. And the thing that still interested me about this, when we were kids growing up, of course, we liked the fact that they were very fast and they could beat non-powered Hot Wheels. But you'll see that the metaphor for the juice machine is, in fact, a gas pump. And the little tiny plug on the edge of that gas pump, very hard to see up there, but it's a little tiny connector that you plug into the car. And indeed, moving a whole society away from the idea that the way we drive our automobiles is from electricity, not from gasoline, was a very, very fundamental shift in thinking. This, of course, is one of the Milburn electric cars from almost 100 years ago. 100 years ago, there were as many electric cars on the road as there were gasoline cars and steam cars. And gasoline cars went out because the price of oil dropped, largely because of oil discoveries here in Texas, and it began to compete very effectively with electricity. And then they figured out how to make gasoline cars not quite so messy, and everybody liked them, and there were more fueling stations for them, and they kind of won the war of early transportation. That happens to be my great uncle's electric car. I drove that once when I was a kid. He was a doctor. He liked electric cars because he didn't want to get his hands dirty. And in those days, gasoline cars meant dirty, and electric cars meant clean. So women and professionals generally preferred the technology. So go back to about the same period. Electric cars were part of the presidential fleets in those days. Actually, the Secret Service there in Woodrow Wilson's thing, they drove electric cars on the White House, but when they went out for public promenades, they took their gas car. That's Mrs. Taft and their electric cars. Anyway, it's the 1920s. The next electric car in my life was this car, of course, the Lunar Rover. 4 of these were built by General Motors. They were also built in California, as it turns out. They're about $10 million each. And there's 4 of them still sitting on, I guess there's 3 on the moon today and 1 in the Smithsonian. And quite remarkable vehicles. They traveled far farther on the moon than you could possibly walk. And the interesting thing that electric car diehards will bring up sometimes is that there's more vehicles powered by electricity on more planets than there are on any other planet in the solar system. For example, we have electric vehicles on Mars, and if you count up the moon and the Mars, and anyway, you get the idea. So electric drivetrains are very effective whether you have oxygen or not, and there's good reasons for that. The next electric car in my life was brought to me by this man. Does anybody recognize the man on the right there? That's Dr. Paul McCready, correct. And Dr. McCready came, a lot of his genius and the work he did came out of the 70s, the first oil peak shocks we had. And Paul was working with composite materials, lightweight materials, to say, hey, how could I do things in a whole different way? How can I do more with less? And he built this bicycle-powered airplane and then a solar-powered plane in the 70s to cross the English Channel. Paul was interested in automobiles as well, and he built, sort of in the tradition of Buckminster Fuller, the EV1. Originally it was the Impact. He built it with Hughes to win a race across the Australian desert, and then General Motors decided to push this into production, and that led to California's decision to force all car makers to try to start making electric cars to deal with California's pollution problems. And I was lucky enough to get one of them. I didn't really know anything about electric cars, And I've been driving them ever since. It's almost been 12 years since my first electric car. The EV1 on the left, the RAV4 EV in the middle, and the Tesla Roadster on the far right. The brilliance of these things is that they need almost no repairs. So you pay more for them up front, hopefully not as much as you have to pay for a Tesla Roadster. But certainly for the EV1 and the RAV4, they just never break down because motors and batteries are very simple compared to driving around with a generation station, a power plant in your car. So the EV1 saga sort of ended here, at least in terms of the story of the car. The cars were repossessed and then secretly destroyed in the Arizona desert, along with cars from all the other makers. Toyota destroyed their cars, not in Arizona. So did Honda, Ford. Everybody wanted these cars off the road. And your diehards would say, well, they just didn't want the evidence of these cars on the streets. The legalese people will say they didn't want to have to be forced to put the cars back on the roads in California because that would create a precedent of the state emissions laws proving victorious over their plans. But whatever it is, and our movie explores this in some detail, the cars didn't make it into the current century, at least not the physical cars. So the answer that I am presenting to my own question is 26. 26 reasons the electric car revolution is back from the dead. And because I'm kind of an artist person, there'll be many digressions. And afterwards, we'll have a Q&A with all of you because each of you brings an important part of the transition that's happening now. Whether it's going to happen very soon or it's going to take a lot longer is yet to be seen. I, for one, believe the transition is happening very fast. So 26 I picked for the one reason because there's 26 letters in the alphabet, which will allow you to time the length of this presentation. You can figure out how much longer you'll need to be here. But it also works out because each of the letters touches on a lot of issues that directly affect the electric car. The A is for asthma, and the facts are that in California and Los Angeles, and really I don't know exactly how many cities in the world, but I'm sure the numbers are very similar. 1 in 4 people, children under the age of 25, have asthma or lesions in their lungs when you look at them medically due to the corrosive effects of unburned gasoline that comes out of cars and ground-borne ozone and volatile organic compounds and everything that the upshot of having tailpipes burning the energy we use for our cars. So this is what led California regulators to say, okay, car companies, we know you can build some alternatives. You've got to build 2% of your fleet's got to be zero-emission vehicles, hydrogen or electric, battery-powered. And that's what got this going the first time. It's still a factor today. We don't see as much pollution as we did in the air when I was growing up in the 70s in California, but it's still very toxic. And electric cars move pollution out of urban centers. And in theory, if you're using renewable energy, they can remove the pollution altogether. Here's some statistics for those of you who like stats. This is just about carbon dioxide, which wasn't a factor in California's decision in 1990, but certainly a factor now. Electric cars reduce CO2 by 46% versus a conventional gasoline car. And plug-in hybrids and hybrids also help reduce this. Carbon dioxide, also a factor. Now remember, you look at something called well-to-wheels when you look at the pollution factor of any car. So when you look at an electric car, you have to consider the coal, the mining the coal in West Virginia. You consider there's hydroelectricity on the system. With gasoline, what's the cost of pulling the oil out of Saudi Arabia now and refining it? So these statistics, and you'll see a lot of them on the internet. I think the NRDC just finished a really comprehensive one, really seem to support the argument with many, many facts that you clean up the amount of emissions when you're using plug-in technology, especially when you're talking about volatile organic compounds. You'll see the EV chart on the corner there is very, very small versus the ICE car, the internal combustion engine car, or for those that like dinosaurs, the cars that run on dinosaur energy from the Ice Age, much higher than the EV. The two basic drivers for this is that you move away the emissions from the population centers if you're using coal to make your electricity, and that ultimately you can clean up those plants a lot simpler when there's very few of them compared to millions and millions of tailpipes on the road. So that's A. B is bankruptcy, bailouts, and buyouts. And what a year it's been for us filming Revenge of the Electric Car in Detroit with all the car companies getting into so much trouble. Probably our dramatic highlight was having General Motors drive an electric car to Washington, D.C. to prove that they deserve to be bailed out after destroying their own electric cars just a few years earlier. But this has created a lot of pressure from the government that didn't used to have any leverage at all in the auto industry, at least in the last 20 years, to really create change, because Michigan's a swing state. The votes are very, very important for that state, and you don't want to mess with an industry which creates so many jobs. I think it's good to see that that's changing. Another light bulb joke could be, how many bailouts does it take to rescue the auto industry? And Saturday Night Live tried to deal with this in a skit one night. It could be quite a few. I have kind of mixed feelings about that. I wish that the auto industry was offered purchase orders for new kinds of cars rather than just writing them checks. But because of these bailouts and the bankruptcy and all this, it's creating a new opportunity for different kinds of drivetrains to make it through Detroit. And I include this chart in here because I'm kind of a super geek, and this is really about emissions. But you'll see that because emissions standards are being moved up, even on this Cash for Clunkers programs, there's an emissions standard they use. Emission standards that we're using here in the United States is far less than what most countries are using. Emission standards in the European Union are up in 40 miles per gallon for gasoline. Even in China, it's 30 to 35, and the U.S. is still under 25. I think the Obama final 2011 standards are 27.3, but we're still really trailing here. So C, one day I'll have a beautiful graphic here that represents everything related to C and carbon dioxide and climate change and carbon offsets. This is not the inconvenient truth presentation, so I'm not going to go into this very much, but there are many advantages to switching your power from gasoline to, and by the way, I have to thank Shell for sponsoring me here today, for sponsoring this series. It is interesting watching the oil industry move around this. They certainly were involved in the 1990s in trying to stop electric cars in California, but you don't see them standing in the way of the electric car movement at this time. So it's a kind of an interesting shift. I think everything's shifting, and that's for good. D is for Detroit. And I don't know how many of you have played Grand Theft Auto Bailout Detroit on the video games. It's a very exciting game. Now in process. Nobody wants to see Detroit completely go up in smoke. And so I think Detroit is the #1 candidate for wanting to save itself. And every time we go up to Detroit and see what the auto industry is doing there, you get the sense that there's a lot of momentum for the electric car movement right in the core of what was traditionally in opposition to it. We went up there, this is Chelsea from our film and I, 2 years ago, and the headlines of all the Detroit local newspapers were, I think it said charged. General Motors had announced the Volt car, and we began to get invited to General Motors press release events, which we got nervous about because we didn't want to be co-opted by the public relations machine at General Motors. But on the other hand, we didn't see ourselves as Michael Moore corporate bashers. Our job was to try to get the electrification of the automobile on the road because we knew it was a good idea. So it's an interesting dance we have with them. But even this year, at both the Frankfurt show, which concluded last week, and the Detroit Auto Show earlier this year, the electric car was the darling, and not just one. Everybody had one. I mean, every car maker out there has an electric car in the works now. So, all comes down to E, electricity. And, I couldn't have told you very much about a kilowatt hour 3 years ago. I'm still not very good in the topic. If you drive a Prius, I have to look it up. See, this is how poor it is still for me. Let's see, a Prius has a 4 kilowatt hour battery pack. It allows you to go about 1 or 2 miles, not very far. My RAV4 EV has a 27 kilowatt hour battery pack. I can go 100 miles on that. So as we move into this new world, thinking about how many kilowatt hours it takes to go a certain distance is very useful. There's some amazing ironies in the kilowatt. For example, it takes an amazing amount of energy to refine gasoline. 36 kilowatt hours is one statistic I got, and maybe there's someone here from Shell or some other place that can comment on that. 36 kilowatt hours to refine 1 gallon of oil into gasoline. So if you put that into an electric drive, that's 120 miles you could drive on that battery power. So I don't know how all these things precisely break down, because I'm the poor filmmaker and not the mathematician. But I do know that electricity and how we use it and where we put it to use can create tremendous energy advantages for this country. It's domestic, and ultimately it's very efficient, because when you step on the brakes, you get your electricity back, and you have an electric motor that's just doing one thing, it's driving you. It's not also creating heat and creating noise and all other factors. So E is for electricity and the energy mind of efficiency. And F is something that most car people will tell you is the most important thing. And that is that people buy cars because they're an extension of themselves. And if you watch Jay Leno's electric car demonstration you'll see once again that electric cars kind of had the stigma of being something that's not very fun. It's supposed to be good for you. And the way that you're going to capture the hearts and minds of people is to remind them that in the United States, cars are about freedom. They give us the freedom of mobility. I can go where I want to. I can get away from my parents. I can get away from my kids. I have a car. It's going to take me places. It's like an extension of the American zeitgeist of individualism and liberty. And my gosh, if it's going to represent me, I want it to be cool. Well, car companies are getting that now, and cars, including that Tesla Roadster I showed you earlier, is one representation of kind of a new kind of cool. The Simpsons did a nice job of representing how traditionally the electric car has not been portrayed as something very cool. I'll just show it's like about a 20-second clip. See if I can get it to work. Let's see.
The electric car of the future, sponsored by the gasoline producers of America.
So, Bart and Homer were not good customers for the electric car after taking that ride at Epcot Center. The funny thing about this episode of The Simpsons, if you've ever seen it, is the other ride of the future is the Enron roller coaster ride. You have all the stockholders get on board, and it goes up and down, up and down, up and down. So, it's very. So, G for geothermal. And I made a mistake in my film not talking about geothermal energy more. We had the sort of the cliche of solar PV cells and things like that, but geothermal is a big deal. This is a shot from Iceland. It's actually of a Icelandic resort. And you can see all the people. It's hard to see this image up here, but there's a whole bunch of people in these beautiful blue waters on the left, and they're all swimming in the hot springs that are created by the geothermal plant on the right, which makes Iceland 100% renewable energy off of geothermal. And we don't all live in Iceland, but there are incredible places for geothermal production in the United States. As you know, Yellowstone National Park is one giant volcano top. There's tons of geothermal in California. And many people think you can create a lot of geothermal just with minute temperature changes between the surface temperature of the Earth and just down a few feet. I went to a geothermal conference in Durango, Colorado last year, and the scientists there were saying by 2050 we could have 20% geothermal in the country. So there are some dangers, geothermal, with the underground earthquakes and things that you're reading about in Germany right now, but it's still a very untapped resource. And I remember the Prime Minister wasn't the Prime Minister of Iceland, it was the President of Iceland. He met with us. This is before they had their own financial meltdown. And he goes, well, there are two fireballs that we can get all of our energy from. There's the fireball in the sky, and there's the fireball at the center of the Earth. And so human beings just need to figure out how to use those fireballs more effectively. H is for horses. And I didn't expect to see horses in my presentation. Not too many. My mom was really happy because she loves horses. The reason I have horses is because it's a way of speaking about generational change and changing about how we think about where we might be going. Nothing is ever set in stone. 100 years ago, we lived in a horse economy. Roads were set up for horses, bridges, roadways. All of England had roads. It's about the horse. If you had a car, you had to have a special exemption to drive over a bridge. You had to get out of your car. You had to have a flag. Horses is it. And horses created a few problems in places like New York City where there was so much horse manure that the rivers were all dying. And it was like, how do you stop this city from smelling any worse than it already does? So when Ford and others came up with a, hey, look at this wonderful car, this gas car. Yeah, it doesn't smell nearly as bad as a horse. And people were very excited about it. They liked the electric cars they saw there too. But it just reminds me that our society has undergone many transitions in transportation. And maybe a few more horses might not be a bad idea for today. But if you talk to Henry Ford, his famous quote on the subject was, if people would ask me what they wanted, they'd say they wanted me to build a better horse. So we're moving forward, I think. Islands. This is just one of the secret ingredients of our next film, and I think of the electric car revolution. Everybody goes, the big problem with electric cars is you can only go 100 miles on a charge. It doesn't fit my life at all. And for a lot of people, it's true. They drive more than 100 miles on a regular basis. But most people drive 25 miles or less. And so where you see electric cars taking off right away are places like Israel, which are they're geopolitical islands. They don't have a lot of electric cars now, but the government loves them because, gee, that's about the range that you drive around Israel in a day. So why are we importing oil from the guys who hate us next door when we could create our own energy here in the desert? We got the Negev Desert. We're on an island. Electric cars, perfect. Places like Hawaii and Iceland. Also, really looking at electric cars because they make sense for their geographic islands. But in a more important sense, I think for most of us, is what's the island that we live in? You know, where do we go? How far is school from where we live? How far is, the movie theater? How often what does that island look like? And if our primary vehicle, whether it's a bicycle or an electric car or our feet, works for that island, then we have other vehicles, other things for other kinds of transportation. So if I want to go to another island, I want to go from Houston to Austin, I'm not going to use my electric car necessarily. I'm going to go get my gasoline car. Or I'm going to rent one from Avis or get one from Zipcar. Or if I want to go to Europe, I'm going to go to the Houston airport, I'm going to fly to Europe. My vehicle doesn't have to do everything. The idea is what's the optimum vehicle I have for most of what I do. And I think as people turn on to this concept, it'll turn out more and more that you don't necessarily need to have a 300-mile range gasoline car to do most of the stuff in your life. So that's I. J, this is a quick one. Jalopnik, the car companies, no one corporate entity controls information on the internet like you used to be able to do on television and the media. I'm not a, twinkle-toed believer in the internet solving all problems, but it is great to see that many, many blogs and websites are covering the changing nature of mobility, and the young generation especially is following it. So I think this will help the internet take off too, as people can see, which products really are for them, and also that maybe transportation is generationally based as much as it is anything else, just like the media. Speaking of new generations, this is my friend Milton Grin. He has converted his family's Hyundai to electric, took out the engine, sold the engine to a scrapyard, put batteries in there. It's got a 30-mile range. He goes to school, and he feels pretty good about that. I think the new generation, at least the ones I'm meeting on my college tours and stuff I do like this, is really getting that there's a revolution happening and they can get in on it. Even in China, where they do have regulations curbing two-stroke motorcycle scooters, you have thousands and thousands of kids converting their scooters to electric. So you have these beautiful little scooters going everywhere off on electricity. So K is for Kansas and kids. He lives in Kansas. L is for lithium batteries. The car companies love to talk about the whole problem with electric cars in the past. In fact, the media picks this up over and over again, is batteries. You need to have better batteries. The reason electric cars haven't changed or progressed is because batteries have been terrible. Well, I disagree a little bit. In our famous trial from our film, we let the batteries as one of the innocent culprits in what led to the destruction of all those cars. It is true that lead-acid batteries can only take an electric car maybe 30 miles, depending on what the weight is. It's not a great range. And that's why we put lead-acid batteries in our golf carts and things that really do have very short ranges without too much weight. The great thing about the last 10, 15 years is that lithium technology has come so far along because we've all been buying these cell phones and laptop computers to run out everything, which means now you're going to have these factories in China. We're going to visit one in 3 weeks, where you have massive stacks of lithium batteries, and suddenly, instead of a 30-mile range vehicle, you have a 100-mile range vehicle. So the increase in energy density for battery packs has been a huge driver, especially in the venture capital community, for why they're putting money into electric vehicles and plug-in vehicles. There is the lithium battery pack that sits in my Tesla Roadster. It's got 5,000 laptop computer batteries in it. And their play was, hey, let's not go try to create a new battery in Troy, Michigan or something. Let's just buy 5,000 Chinese batteries and have a nice power controller and use that. That way the battery is truly a commodity. It's subject to commodity pricing, and the price will drop as the commodity gets more affordable. We can talk later about whether there's a pending lithium crisis or not. I don't think there is, but we'll come back to that. So M is for money. You look at the spreadsheets, and electric cars, plug-in cars, even plug-in hybrids are getting less expensive in the big picture. And what really drives most people to buy their cars, besides their self-image and what the projection of a car is for them, is how much is it going to cost me? And the truth is that electric vehicles, anything with a battery, new technology, is more expensive. So people don't want something more expensive. They want something that's cheaper. But it pencils out for the Avises and Hertzes of the world and everybody when you start looking at the cost of ownership. This chart that I have up here isn't even updated with all the cost of ownership. But because electric cars have no tune-ups, which means no oil changes, no air filters. Really, most of them are single-speed transmissions. They're very, very fast off the line, and then they're not quite so fast accelerating when you get up to 80 miles an hour. But very simple transmissions. They have almost no repair. Motors go forever. What you change every 5 to 7 years, instead of an engine, is you change the battery pack. So this begins to pencil out very well, especially when you start leasing the battery pack to people. And you, like a cell phone plan, you buy an electric car that has a 30-mile range, a 50-mile range, a 70-mile range, and you buy per mile. This is a much less complex version of that discussion, which just talks about the energy cost of a Toyota RAV4. The top shot is a gasoline-powered Toyota RAV, and it's about $12 to go 300 miles at $3 a gallon. And you create 75 pounds of CO2 and a whole bunch of other stuff downstream that we're not tracking. The battery-powered is $3.60 to go about 100 miles per charge. That's at 12 cents a kilowatt hour. The power is much cheaper at midnight, but that's an equivalent charge. I think when you look at the total cost of ownership on a per-mile basis, electric cars pencil out at about half the cost of gasoline. But this is a big shift, and it doesn't happen instantly because people have to really think of what their car really costs them. National security. Well, I don't really have to talk about too much about this, except that one of the great things during the McCain-Obama election was that both candidates were arguing for electric cars and batteries because they understood that because we now, ever since 1974, we get more of our energy from the Middle East, oil dependency is a huge national security issue. So we might not like the tree huggers, or we might not like the right-wingers, or whatever the hell, but ultimately we want to get off oil or use oil for things where it's mission critical, like airplanes. There are no electric-powered airplanes, or you certainly can't fly a 747 on electricity. You need to save gasoline for pharmaceutical plastics, oil for pharmaceutical plastics, in my view, for air transportation. And for vehicles on the ground, electricity is ideal. So that's N for national security. O is for Obama. He's not quite feeling so super a year into his term here. as he was during this campaign photo. In fact, even if you look at the photo in greater resolution like I can see here, he's not smiling very much. But he is helping this along. Obama, while McCain was calling for battery research, Obama called for 1 million plug-in vehicles on the roads by 2015. So that's, 29, that's 6 years from now, 1 million plug-in vehicles. Most people in the automobile industry feel that that's actually a conservative number. But the fact that he put that on a plate as a national objective has been very helpful. In part of the big government handout right now, how much, I'm not even tracking all of it. I know $2.4 billion went to electric car battery drives. And in the previous administration, a lot of the research money was going into hydrogen fuel cells, which didn't play out in the short term particularly well. He also has, in part of the bailout functions for the Detroit, more money going to electric vehicles. So if you go to Washington right now, and we did this about 3 months ago, every electric car manufacturer is, there to make sure their congressman tries to get a piece of this electric car pie. And, not all of it is a good investment. I think that being able to weed out wise investments probably comes down to focusing on pilot programs and battery technology and controllers. And I think so far the Obama administration, the jury's out for us that care about the subject, but there seems promising. P is for Prius. How many people have seen this ad with the Prius dragging the sunshine behind it? Well, it drives some of us crazy because the Prius has been very good, blah, 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 for helping people have high mileage cars, and Toyota spent a lot of money on it, and that's great. But there is a lot of misrepresentation. There's a solar panel now on the top of the Prius 3. Does anybody have that feature on their Prius? Well, all it does is it runs the air conditioner partially. And the fact is that you can't run your car off of solar panels on the roof of your car. It's just impossible. There's not enough surface area. It doesn't point in the right direction. If it's raining, you're out. So, what Toyota is trying to do is, they're greening their brand with the Prius. And it is a terrific car. I have one. But ultimately, I think what the Prius has done, and all of the hybrids on the market, even though they're not plug-in yet, has been to make people think about electricity when they look at their monitor. Do most people know that instrument cluster now, the green panel there? And again, it's kind of wacky. If you're a design person, you'd say, well, that's not a particularly good diagram of what's happening. But once you start driving these Priuses or these hybrid cars, even though they don't have plugs, you begin thinking like, oh, it's so nice when the gasoline engine doesn't kick in. So the Prius effect has been very good for getting people comfortable with a car that runs on electricity. And because people see their cars as so important to their safety and to their image, transition takes a while. So I give Prius some credit for that. So let's see, the other way. Q is for quality. There on the left is BMW's Mini Cooper plug-in. Super cute car. There's a pilot program in California right now. And on the right is Mitsubishi's i-MiEV, which looks a little bit more like a classic, it doesn't look like it will sell around here type electric car. But the i-MiEV is now in a pilot program of 2,000 vehicles in Japan. People are really impressed. These cars are very high quality. They weren't made by your uncle in Des Moines. These are solid cars. Companies want them to last and last and last. So I think quality and perceived quality by customers out there is a big shifter. Now, I mentioned this earlier, regenerative braking. This is a tiny little outtake from our film. It's like, I think, a minute long. And it basically goes over a concept of regen braking, which, amongst other things, results in very few brake changes for your car. So I'm sorry that was very hard to see, but at the end of that little segment, we included a little montage from our film, and we wanted to, because it's so difficult to show an automobile that's in a new way, we decided, what's the one thing automobiles don't really show you very much of? I said, well, tailpipes. It's like looking at the unpleasant part of a car. So we had a whole montage that we spent some money on setting up of tailpipes from cars. But R for regeneration. The regeneration in the Tesla, the RAV4, the EV1 have had a chance to drive over the last 10 years. It's really pretty remarkable. And they can set it at whatever level you want. So actually, it's whatever level they want, but it's a variable rate. And some people can almost drive without ever hitting the brakes at all. So you save your ABS brakes for emergencies, and most of the time you're just driving on regen. So S is for sun power. And I'd just like to point out that, of course, in addition to solar panels, which I have here in the lower right on the roof of our house in Culver City, sun is also behind wind, and it's behind plants, and it's behind hydro. So without renewable energy investment, and which is great for the carbon factor too, electric cars are an improvement, but they're not everything they can be. You can clean electric cars and plug-in technology to be 100% clean, or 99.99, using more and more sun power and geothermal. And I know Copenhagen's coming up in 2 months, and there's a lot of pushback as people are worried about getting the economy jump-started. But if this generation is about anything, I hope it's about getting more and more sun power into our energy matrix. I think even the traditional energy companies understand this, because, well, it's a whole nother subject. But for EVs, sun power is a big part of it. I drive the electric car at our house. Actually, the two are charged off of our house. And I have, if you go to marrakeshhouse.com, there's my solar grid is online. And you can see, like, when we have a party, when we use energy, when the pool pump turns on, if the sun is out, if the sun isn't out. And it's really interesting becoming more and more energy aware as you make your own energy. And if you don't mind living in public a little bit, you can use a program called Fat Spaniel, where you can attach your house to the public grid, and you can see how your energy use works during the day. And I have to say, I'm an energy pig when on the event we have parties, because the sound system gets plugged in and we start using energy. But we don't use a big battery to make us survive forever in the event of a survivalist situation. People go, well, don't you have battery backup for your house? And I really see the grid that we all share, that was built in the 30s and hopefully will get picked up and repaired in the next years here, as our shared battery. We just need to feed it more with distributed energy. So there you go, Marrakesh House, if you want to look at my embarrassing energy consumption. And T is for Tesla. Now Tesla, who's one of the stars of our new film, was, who's heard of Nikola Tesla? Probably almost everybody in the room, right? He became the prototypical mad scientist. He got most notoriety when he started trying to build a laser beam that he didn't call a laser, but and practicing on underground earthquakes. I think he was in Brooklyn, and seeing if he could make Manhattan shake by setting off like subsonic sound vibrations under his house. So when Hollywood started, electricity began really coming to the mainstream. All these cliches began to be based on Nikola Tesla. But one of the great things he did, besides radio, besides everything else, was coming up with AC power. And AC power has been a huge jump in what an electric car can be. That middle car there is named after Tesla. Like the EV1, like all the electric cars that the car companies are doing now, they're AC powered. This means that you have extremely smooth acceleration. You can technically do it with DC power, but when you convert it to AC, you're dealing with something that's as exciting as, let's say, going to Six Flags and riding their newest roller coaster. The one that has like half G, 1G, 2Gs, 3Gs, 2Gs, 1Gs. It's very, very exciting. More precise, I would argue, than you can get with a gasoline car, just because electricity can be so carefully controlled. And AC power is a big part of it. On the right is me being stopped by the police on the first night when the Tesla was delivered. And we got the two police car pullover with the lights, with all the officers coming out of the car. And I hadn't been speeding. I had an hour earlier briefly been speeding, but I wasn't then. And they came up and they go, is this one of those electric sports cars? I went, yes. And then the officer says, I told you. So they just had a little interior bet. And I was going to bring up that you probably shouldn't pull people over legally without, but then no, I'll bring that up. All right. So utilities. In California in the 90s, utilities had a hard time defending charging stations against Western States Petroleum, because utilities were under a lot of pressure. Enron was in the works, and they were super bad guys, or I shouldn't say bad or good. That doesn't matter. They didn't have very much political power. So when their charging stations were fought, they didn't provide that much pushback to try to save the electric infrastructure in California. This time, utilities are, I think, in a much better position to defend taking a share of the transportation energy market. This amazing picture is actually from our shoot in the Negev Desert last year. It's a utility pilot project using mirrors and the sun. And rather than using photovoltaic cells to collect energy, this is more like, I would never do this myself, but magnifying glass with ants. You're shining the sun at a boiler. There's a boiler up there. All those mirrors are shining at that boiler. And I think they're building it on top of an old Wildcat rig or something. But in any case, at the top of that rig on the left here, there's a boiler, and the energy gets, all the water gets, you basically have a steam-generated electricity system. So this pilot project in Israel is getting rolled out in California next year by both Southern California Edison, and the amount of energy they'll be generating it with is very significant. I think one of them has the word Terra in it, but I don't know. I haven't checked it recently, so I don't want to quote it, but it's quite powerful. And they just have little tiny motors behind each mirror that follows the sun during the day. So as you do more and more of this, of course, you're building a more and more robust, distributed and centralized solar energy system. And a lot cheaper, too. And I happen to think it looks like an old prop from a War of the Worlds movie or something. Okay, V is for Volt, another one of the big characters from our film. This is General Motors' triumphant return to the electric car movement. And it's coming out at the end of 2010. Oh, look, I have water. That's great. This is a plug-in hybrid, so it's not a pure electric. But they don't call it a plug-in hybrid. They call it an extended range EV. That's because the car is basically an electric car, but it only goes 40 miles on a charge, which covers most of people's driving, depending on who you are. But the bonus is that it has a charger built back into it, a gasoline-powered charging station that's built into the car. So it's like dragging around your own Honda generator. You start it up and you charge your own batteries as you go. And it's a nice concept because it's a way of allaying people's concerns that they'll run out of power in their electric car, and then what will they do? So the new General Motors, I should say, because as we know they sold off all their really weak assets, has taken the Volt with them, and there's no reason, in my view, that the thing won't take off. The price point's probably the biggest issue. It's like, how much are people willing to pay? And they don't have a model for leasing battery packs yet, which is why the battery pack is pretty small. But we're cautiously optimistic that GM's going to do a very nice job with this car. And we drove the Volt at their mule demonstration this summer, and I thought it was terrific. W is for Warren Buffett and Wang Chunfu. BYD, Chinese electric car company. If Warren Buffett's investing money in this thing, it makes me think that maybe something's going right. Warren cares about electric cars, and he's decided that this Chinese company is the right to do it. The Chinese are in a good position to do electric cars because they have all the battery factors for all the laptop computers and cell phones we've been buying for the last 20 years from them, and everything else. The car, I have not seen it for myself. We're going to film them for the next film, again this fall. I think the real challenge of a electric car from a company called BYD is, A, no one's driven an electric car before, and 2, no one's heard of BYD. So that's kind of a double challenge for a consumer to take it seriously. But the people that study these things say there's a generational change going on, and why are people so in love with Ford and GM and some of these brands that have let us down? Maybe try out a new brand. And if Warren's successful with this, it'll have a great trickle down for everybody else doing it. And Warren, of course, and Wang Chunfu are just two examples of innovators and entrepreneurs in this space. There are so many amazing entrepreneurs. And if you go, what are the really smart people doing right now? You look amazing group of people are pushing electric car technology. The Google guys, for example, Larry and Sergey, their first foundation they set up with their billions of dollars was called rechargeit.org. And people went, what about AIDS in Africa? What about, 13,000 kinds of cancer? Why are you doing electric cars? And they believe that it's because it's a trickle-down effect. When you begin to change something as fundamental as the automobiles we drive and make them a healthier thing, that's good for the world. Elon Musk, this is another big character from our film. Elon is 34 years old. He has 5 children. He sold PayPal to eBay. He made $1 billion. His primary company is SpaceX. He got the first rocket into orbit as a private company about a year and a half ago. He's an amazing guy. He's South African. He lives now he lives, I guess, in Southern California. But his hobby project, which he's very serious about, is Tesla and that Tesla sports car. They got $480 million from the DOE as their recent grant, and they're making a 4-passenger Model S sedan that we're all looking forward to. So, along with our W entrepreneurs, there's Elon and a lot of other amazing people. Okay, well, almost done with the A to Z's here. This is X. I know I'm cheating, but there's a common conception that electric cars mean tiny things that you would never drive. Maybe your little sister would, but I would never drive. Turns out that there's some amazing big electrics out there. The biggest electric motors in the world, or vehicles in the world, are underground in coal mines, moving coal around and things like this. But if you take those kinds of machines off, the next biggest electrics are trucks like this being used at the Port of Long Beach, pushing containers around, and electric buses. In fact, the fuel cell buses are electric drivetrains. And then more and more commercial vehicles. And when we were in Washington, D.C. about 3 months ago, a company that was devoted to nothing else but commercial electric vehicles is called Bright Automotive. And they went, hey, listen, we know that the Doritos guy, every day he goes 22 miles on his whole route. Every day, then at nighttime he can come plug in. So let's make this the ultimate potato chip. We have, the Doritos over here and whatever else they sell. And he does this round every day. And this truck will never have any repairs. We know exactly how long it takes to charge. There's no variables for it. It's a better deal. And so Doritos is one of their advanced customers, or Frito-Lay, I should say. So electrics work depending on the kinds of business model that you have. So that's X. Z, I have to end it with, there's Y. See, this is what I get for going to Colgate. Okay, Y before Z. This is kind of a feel-good piece. These are 2 characters from our film. And our film was only successful, at least in my view, because we had really interesting people telling the story. These are 2 of our most wonderful people. It's an excerpt. This is not in the film, but kind of represents that people taking chances and being the first people in their family to try new technology, especially electric vehicles, makes a big difference. So here's I think it's like a 1 minute or 1 minute 40-second clip. You don't have to get arrested to enjoy electric cars, but they certainly really took it right to the end. And I think they turned a lot of people around that were sort of skeptical about their level of commitment. So Z is for zeitgeist. Z, zeitgeist. And I'm a baby boomer. I'm 48 years old. I'm at the rate of the baby boom. I know this movement right now is really being taken up by the next generation. I see it everywhere. I just got back from Washington, D.C., staying with friends in an apartment building. All 2 apartment buildings were all zip car based, which meant they're all sharing cars. You only rent them for an hour. So I had electric scooters. People had electric things. Someone gave me that postcard, which is one of my favorite, that zip car advertisement that came out when light rail opened up in Seattle. The zip car thing said, "We have your light rail surrounded." It's like, well, they're like competing with light rail, and they're providing a value add. Because what we're in is a generation of new mobility. And the gasoline-powered car was kind of amazing in the fact that it filled so many niches for us. But it seems like with the disadvantages that gasoline cars have, and they have many, coming up with new systems, our bicycles, our light rails, our electric vehicles instead of our cars we had before, maybe improved public transportation, all this stuff comes together and spells zeitgeist. And with the perils of the world hanging over us, and sometimes I really feel like the glass is half empty, I think that what's happening in mobility is one of the more promising stories in this country that we've got going. So, I do have some wrap-up slides. There's the 26 reasons why I think the electric vehicle revolution is in progress. And the three most important would be, for me, thinking about electricity as being the potentially renewable energy of our future. Sun power, whatever way the sun comes, and you being the driver for it, are ultimately more important than whether a battery is slightly better one year or the next year, or whether Obama's president or somebody else does. These are fundamental drivers. So what we'll do is, if you guys have questions for me, I can do some Q&A, and then if anyone wants to stay, I can show a 2-minute trailer for Revenge of the Electric Car. We're still a year away from that film being finished, but we have some ideas about where it's going. I'd be happy to show that. And then there's some DVDs if anybody wants to look at clips. So do we have a microphone?
We're webcasting for our non-in-person viewers in light of our internet generation. So please feel free to come up to the mic and ask a question. I definitely want to see some Rice students up at the mic. So.
Do you know if anyone's working on natural gas battery combination?
Natural gas
and battery combination.
You
can just stay here.
Okay. Well, I have not seen a hybrid natural gas car with batteries. I've heard about them. In fact, the Volt was originally going to have a version with hydrogen. I think natural gas was their second one, and gasoline was their third. And they decided just to start with gasoline because it's already complicated enough for the consumer to worry about other things. Many people believe that the natural gas is the best thing for it is in centralized electricity distribution. In fact, a lot of coal plants are being new coal plants aren't being built right now because natural gas prices have dropped because they've just had these advances, and you probably know more than I do about that. But it turns out that having distributed natural gas electricity is probably more efficient than trying to make it inside a car. Yeah, good question. Any other questions?
The question's about filmmaking also, besides just about the car.
Say again?
Where do fuel cells come in?
Well, where do fuel cells come in? It's a very good question. I mean, fuel cell have a huge history. In fact, my father, who was at Princeton in '59, said that people were writing, himself included, papers on fuel cells in the '50s. And indeed, the Apollo astronauts took fuel cells up in the Apollo missions to make their energy. But in the modern era, the most recent era, Amory Lovins and people at the Rocky Mountain Institute and places like that have championed fuel cells, especially in stationary buildings, for creating very efficient ways to heat buildings and so forth. It was also posited to put them in vehicles. And as part of the electric car wars in California, fuel cells were pitted against battery-powered electric cars as which one is a more appropriate technology to invest in. And unfortunately, a lot of the sort of vested interests really push for fuel cells, even though they're probably a lot farther off in terms of being able to deploy economically. Fuel cell vehicle is basically an electric vehicle, but instead of using batteries to store it, you have onboard hydrogen, and the hydrogen is put through a fuel cell, and then it makes electricity. So for your super cynics, you go, well, fuel cells are all a big scam by the oil companies because they want to control electricity. And the only way that they can fit electricity into their scheme to continue to dominate the world is by converting all electricity. Remember, what you do is to make hydrogen is you take water, and if you use it through electrolysis, you zap the water, and the hydrogen goes, oh, okay, I don't want to be attached to oxygen anymore, and you have pure hydrogen. Then as an oil industry or as a shipper of fuel, you ship your hydrogen fuel. It gets put into your car, and then it gets converted back into water, and you get power out of it, which is all well and good. But the problem is that it takes so much energy to get those hydrogen atoms to do what you want. It's like a 2 or 3 times less efficient than if you just put it into a battery. So that's a very long answer to your question, but what's happening right now is that the automakers are backing off from fuel cells because it's no longer a political play they're doing. The technology is still being developed, but most of the focus right now is on battery power. And you will see fuel cell hydrogen buses. I think General Motors has some working in all the national parks, and there are places where they work. But I don't see that happening in a mass scale until the prices can come down on platinum and other maybe technical issues.
I just had a question. It's pretty broad. In the old documentary, you point out that there's 100 trillion or something to still be made in oil. So my question to you is, what do you think has changed between then and now? The old documentary was called Who Killed the Electric Car? And now it's The Revenge of the Electric Car. So what's changed throughout that time that makes you think that electric cars have a chance now? Is it like public policy or people's opinions or people's views on the environment in general and just everybody's environmental concern growing? Or what do you think has changed that provides hope? Do you understand my question?
Well, this is a little bit about my presentation today. So I'm much more optimistic today for hundreds of reasons. But the main reason is I think that business interests see they can make money on it. Government issues see that people are demanding it, and they're willing to push for initiatives to make it more possible. Business likes those initiatives because it means free money for them, and for the short term. And for the longer term, I think that electric cars are penciling out better than they ever did in the past. And so this is a time of change. And one reason we're even making this next film is the first film was about why deep change gets stopped. And the reason is, it's not because of the oil companies or the auto companies, it's because everybody resists change. Nobody really wants to change the way they do things. I used to have a slide that showed me in my electric car parking at cost, spending an hour driving around the Costco parking lot trying to get a spot closer to the front door because I'm too lazy. And it's like, it doesn't matter what you're driving. So I don't want to change my habits. I'm kind of lazy. I want to be close to the door. And I think now, because so many things have shifted, people are still resistant to change, but there's a lot more openness to it. And when you have the money flowing in the same direction as change, you get change. So that's why I'm much more positive. Yeah.
So there are a lot of tax incentives for buying electric cars and hybrids, and also you have a law saying that we want to do 1 million cars by 2012 or whatever, 2015. Has the government considered the loss of gas tax revenue for infrastructure and continuation of building the roads? And in your research, have you come across that?
Well, the government doesn't seem to know very much about revenue at all right now. So that's I think the bigger issue. Yeah, it's great. We depend on oil taxes for a lot of things.
Right, but if you're taking 1 million gas cars off the road and not filling up, then how do you support the continuation of building infrastructure, especially in bankruptcies like California?
Well, I think this all happens a lot slower than anybody wants. It takes 7 years for the majority of the vehicle fleet to turn over in the U.S. According to Hertz and Avis and those guys, it takes a long time. And just because electric cars are really available in the marketplace doesn't mean that suddenly most cars are electric. Most cars are electric. I think even Carlos Ghosn, the head of Nissan, says that it's 2020 before you really see electric cars everywhere, but still not the majority. So there's a lot of transition stuff that has to happen there. And, let's face it, you should be able to have as government taxes on solar electricity power, and all the other kinds of energy sources could be taxed. And there'd be road taxes. So, but this is, we have an economy based on cheap oil. We have for the last 30 years. We take a portion of that to help fund our government. This is a big change. Oil's not going to be so cheap anymore. Where's all the revenue coming from? So I think that's... Sorry, my
So let me add to that answer that the Baker Institute will have a new study coming out in the next few weeks looking at biofuels and analyzing the logistics and the science and the environmental impact of biofuels. And we sat and made a calculation for how much you, the taxpayer, are paying for the barrels of ethanol that are replacing gasoline in the United States to provide energy security. And you are paying, in addition to the $2.49 when you fill up, you're paying an extra $51 a gallon for the 160,000 barrels a day of gasoline that's being replaced by ethanol. So when you think about how we pay taxes in this country, how we use our taxes to drive energy policy. I think that there needs to be a complete and total reevaluation. I think in the debate of the Markey-Waxman bill, we think about how that's going to change energy costs and who we want to give a free permit to and who we don't want to give a free permit to and who will pay the bill of any free permit we give away. I think the public needs to be much more engaged in asking those kinds of questions, which is who's paying the bill and what actual policy result are we getting for the money we spend, the public money we spend. Other questions?
I had a very specific question about BYD E6. That's going to be the first, as I understand it, the first mass-produced car that will be marketed in the United States.
Which one?
The E6 that is made by BYD.
Mm-hmm.
And that is scheduled for export to the U.S. in 2010. Did you say that you were going to feature that car in your next documentary?
Yes, we're going to China in about a month.
And you're going to are you going to the BYD factory in Shenzhen?
I don't know. We're talking about the BYD factory where potentially these cars are going to be imported in mass quantities to the U.S. next year. And I don't know where we're going quite yet because we're doing kind of we're going to Japan first to look at what the Japanese car companies are doing, and then we're going to China to look at batteries and BYD specifically. So if you have ideas, drop me a line at it's Chris at Papercut Films is my email. Yeah. Yes.
That relates to the potential environmental impact of batteries. You said that in New York City they thought that the event of the car was a terrific idea because of the horse manure that it replaced. But anything that scales brings its own environmental issues, like how do we dispose of lots and lots of lithium-ion batteries and so forth. So has anybody thought of that? Because we're going to encounter that problem at some point.
So you're asking...
So the question is about what would be the environmental impact of having to dispose of a greater number of lithium-ion batteries.
Okay, yeah. Well, this is a great question. All right, so great. Now you just have another kind of toxic problem for the future called electric car batteries. And, it turns out that electric car, or any car batteries, have been one of the most successful recycling programs in history. Anytime your lead acid battery, lead being very toxic, dies, you take it to Sears or wherever, you get a replacement battery. And this is a very, very high turnover. The problem with batteries has been people throwing away their flashlight batteries and their little... if you talk to anybody at landfill people, it's like, I wish people would stop throwing out all their little batteries. It's 95% of the problem. And the good news about electric car batteries is they're more expensive than lead acid, nickel metal batteries, lithium batteries, and these batteries have second and third lives because you can recapture the lithium and nickel in these materials and you can put them in less application specific things like fire alarms or things like this. So there'll be a big second and third market. This is the way all the engineering reports are going right now for these things. So they're not too worried about that. The bigger environmental problem is like, oh God, we're going to make a whole bunch of new cars, and making an actual car takes a lot of energy. So if you're looking at that, but we live in a country with cars, and I don't think that that's going to stop. So what kind of cars are you going to build? Yeah.
Last year, one of my friends, he showed me his car, and it consisted of a gasoline-powered engine and a battery. And what was interesting about it was that every time that he stopped at a stoplight, the battery would recharge. And so I had never heard of anything like this, but I was wondering if you've conducted any research on techniques like this that recharge the battery of cars.
Well, the number one way to recharge your battery is with regenerative braking. So when you get to a stop sign, all your energy using to stop at that stop sign goes into your battery. So it's recharging your battery at that moment. It's not 100%. In fact, I think the actual number is closer to 50 because there's inefficiency with the physics and things like that. But the reason the Prius hybrid has better mileage in the city than it does in the highways because of this exact factor. It recharges every time you get to a stoplight, and the engine is never on when you're sitting in traffic. And one thing that's interesting, once you drive an electric or a hybrid for a while, you begin to just go crazy when you're sitting in traffic and you're breathing all that that toxic exhaust, which isn't doing anything except for people's, playing radios. So it's regen braking. Unfortunately, things like, like on the Prius with their ad with the solar panel on the roof, or having a windmill that as you drive, the windmill is like generating power. It doesn't pencil out. The physics just don't work out. You end up with a sore hand and not too much power. So regen braking is, yeah.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the technology of the EV1 compared to the technology of the new electrical cars? And if the EV1 was so good when it was produced, why not to dust off the plans and just reproduce again the EV1?
Well, they won't bring back the EV1 because it's a corporate face-saving issue. It's like, we did that, we made a mistake. Even the head of Rick Wagner, who's no longer there, but said that was his biggest mistake as a CEO, which is it was a nice moment for those of us who weren't able to save it. But ultimately, that's a two-person car, so it's not that effective for most people. People need a four-seater car and not a sports car. Now, Tesla, the Roadster in there, is a two-person car, and it was built by some of the original components were built by the EV1 team. So technology's out there. General Motors has made the point that if we can get the efficiency of our trucks up a little bit with hybrid systems on those, and if we'll do an electric car, we'll make it a four-seater that will reach more people then. So that's their argument. So, yeah, but the plant's still sitting there in Lansing with all the plants. And, Michael Moore likes to go up there and complain about it sometimes, but I've given up on that. Yeah.
So I have a question about the documentary process. In your video, the electric car who killed it, it felt very focused. But when you were actually shooting it, did you feel like you knew where you were going with it entirely?
Wow, a filmmaking question. Okay, it's a free DVD. It's very funny. My producer and I used to travel, or actually Chelsea, the redhead in our movie, and we would make bets about whether there'd be any filmmaking questions. And so whenever there was, we used to give away DVDs as our little joke for ourselves. Yeah, great question. I mean, how many of you are filmmakers here? I heard there might be some members or class or thinking about it. Yeah. Well, the truth is you don't know where you're going. And you write an outline. I thought this movie was going to be a really hilarious comedy about why only in LA could you have a funeral for your car. And then the booby trap was going to be, but it was an electric car. And so we helped people to understand. And so it's true, LA is one of the few places you could have a funeral for a car. Although I guess you have Ant Farm here in Texas somewhere, right? So there's a lot of humor about cars here too. But as you begin making the film, you don't know where you're going, and things happen. Like you get the phone call, it's like, hey, you found this place where they're destroying all these cars, and people send you footage, and then your chief character dies, and then someone tells you something, and what you thought your story was, you have to let go of and drop some of your conclusions and come up with new ones. So our process, we use that program FileMaker. And we made hundreds of index cards basically, and then we just sort them in different piles. Like this is the big car race, and this is the big technology chase, and this is the conspiracy movie. And we decided not to call it. One of the sad things for us as filmmakers is we decided this is not a conspiracy movie. And we finished the movie. It never uses the word conspiracy in it. We're very careful. And then Sony markets the movie as a conspiracy movie because they say, well, conspiracy movies are what people rent. They want to feel like the man has it in for you. And so while we suggest that the man had some motivations here, anyway, so you don't really know what's going to happen. You kind of have to just let go. But the fun part of a documentary is you might end up somewhere more interesting than you thought when you started.
Yeah, I just have an observation and a question. One, here in Texas, we have an awful lot of electric power that's generated by coal that was the result of federal edicts. And the government upsetting the normal marketplace because they thought there was going to be a shortage of natural gas. And so it's just a bit of caution when the government gets involved. They're not a very reliable partner. They can change their plans at any time. So investments made on continuing government support, you better have a good banker as a backup. And my question is, what will it take for electric cars to be competitive in the market without subsidies or anything of that nature? Is there something that has to happen, or or are we close enough now to where electric cars can compete? It's just an attitudinal change, or what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both excellent observation too. I was at the Seattle Convention of Utility Regulators, and they said the reason coal is great is that our number one job is to make sure that you never have a brownout, not to make sure that global warming doesn't happen. And if you have a brownout, then we haven't done our job for you. And so we like coal because it's our reliable backup. We always know we have this much coal sitting here we can turn on. And another person said that actually natural gas is sometimes being positioned now as the nice battery backup if you have a lot of renewables on the system. But of course you have to build a plant, and anyway, it's a whole big discussion. But to your point, I think what's going to happen to really help electric cars out in the early days are, one, these mobility scenarios like Zipcar, where people are sharing cars, especially new generation people, that they don't see a car being exactly what it was before. You don't have to own it outright to begin with. And what Shai Agassi in Israel wants to do, and a lot of people have discussed, is leasing battery packs like cell phones. So you think you need the 300 battery pack, like my Tesla goes 200 miles on a charge. Oh, I need that. And then you go, wait, why am I paying $400 or $600 a month when I really only need a 100-mile battery pack? And so batteries become part of the, a separate part of the car almost in terms of how you think about pricing it, not necessarily something you buy up front. And then the next answer to the question is that as they make more cars, the R&D cost gets amortized. And one of the big advantages of the gas car is that it's fully amortized, almost fully amortized, the cost of the industrial machines to make all those parts. So that's why government, I think, needs to be there a little bit to help this out to begin with and get people familiar with it and help some of the industrial costs. But obviously, I'm a partisan on this. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about why we switched from electric cars to, I guess, gasoline cars. I mean, when we already had them there in place, and why oil wasn't used more for maybe power generation, and sort of instead of gasoline stations have recharging. Like, what was the impetus initially back in the early 1900s to switch over to gasoline?
Well, I mean, I alluded to this briefly, but the big drivers are that oil became very cheap for the first time because they discovered oil here and it became cheaper. And Standard Oil and a lot of the companies in the early days really figured out, like, get these service stations built along the most important roads, and we can edge out these other technologies. But the biggest one was that they came up with the electric starter, which suddenly guaranteed that when you got in your gas car, even though it was noisy, which guys they like noisy cars because it's like, not to be too sexist here, but there's a lot of studies. It's like, you want a car to project your power. And if your car can make a nice loud sound, ask any, parent with a teenager on Main Street, that sounds like you too have power. So who would want this quiet electric car? So there's kind of psychological reasons and things like that. But I think the business reason is that the gas car, they could make them in bigger quantity for less money, and there was recharging stations in the form of gas stations. So, but that's, again, I think there's many reasons why that's shifting today.
So I have a question on the process of the after being a filmmaker. So the movie comes out, and it's this big blockbuster documentary film, and lots of people are buying it and seeing it and talking about it. Did that surprise you? Were you expecting to get that kind of reaction? And what was some of the most surprising things that happened for you after the film came out?
Well, usually when you make a documentary, it's, as I like to say in our family, it's you and your mom at the Santa Fe Film Festival. And that's all who ever sees the movie. Because documentaries are very hard to distribute, and it's impossible to get them into the studio system because they're not seen as a way to make money. But we used internet and viral marketing, and Sony got involved, and they started pushing it largely because, for a cynical business reason, they knew that they were pushing Inconvenient Truth with a $30 million budget, and they wanted to have another environmental movie that they could swing in underneath it. So we became part of their plan B for Inconvenient Truth, and it really helped us get a lot of exposure for the film. And then Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, featured us, and so we got to do that show, and then we just sort of took off from there, because with the pop culture And I think a lot of people are just curious about why is it that, a country where we're a free market, we're supposed to have lots of choices, there are no electric cars. It's just like one of those, what happened to the streetcars back in the 50s? That was another issue for people. Why did they all get taken out? It's like, and because we had the really rare opportunity to track this thing A, B, C, D, and have lawyers double check our work because we were under a lot of legal liability if we said things that weren't true. Not only Sony, but Dean, who paid for our movie. Dean Devlin did The Patriot and a bunch of movies like that. He goes, I can't get sued on this movie. So we spent almost $100,000 to try to make the movie as sue-proof as possible and as accurate as possible. And I often felt I didn't want to do a Michael Moore movie because my dad hates Michael Moore so much. And I wanted him to see the movie, and I thought, let's try to make a movie that, okay, sure, we have a point of view, but we're going to try to tell the whole story. So I have 2 quick clips. I know we're at 5:30. Okay. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Should I show the Stan and Iris clip? Maybe I'll show this. It might be more interesting to you than the trailer for the next film. This is Stan and Iris, who are... Iris has now passed away. It's an outtake from the film as well, and they really summon up the spirit of the film. So here we go. Without further ado, if I get it just to work. Yeah. So that's the Oshinskis, and really amazing. And the nickel metal battery that they developed for the EV1 and for the Prius has turned out to be an incredibly reliable battery. It's not being pursued anymore. There's a whole story about that, but it's a good one if you want to pursue one. Okay, would you like to see the trailer for the next film? Okay, it's they can't videotape it, right? And then if you turn that light off, that would be great. This is what's called, this is an inside trailer. It's not really for the public. It's part of a internal document. I won't say anything else about it. I hope you like it. Thank you, everybody.